Monday, May 23rd, 2016, the order. If the clerk will please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the minute. Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Here. We have a quorum.
Great. Before, has anyone signed in for public comment related
miss-
to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Before us are the minutes from the April 11th, 2016 meeting. If there are no objections, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Before us, we have no matters referred to committee. We do have a discussion on the first quarter financial results, and will Mr. Kennedy come forward and present the results. This information was presented to us a few weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago. So
Yes.
I hope my colleagues have an opportunity to review the financial results. And Mr. Kennedy, if you'd please provide some narrative.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Councilman Greenspan. As opposed to going through the report in depth, we put together a series of slides that present an overview of some of the pertinent information. So I'd like to just run through that with you and then open it up for questions for either myself or Ms. Keenan from OBM, who can provide some detailed responses. On the first slide that we have here is just a summary of the revenue and expenses and the balance to expenditures, both for the 2015 actual, our original budget, or I should say our adjusted budget for 2016, and then the revised numbers based on the first quarter results as produced by the Office of Budget Management. For the general fund, just operations, excluding the 0.25%, we had originally projected annual revenue of $385.9 million. That amount, as of the first quarter results, has been revised for 2016 to $376.5 million. The adjusted budget for 2016 expenditures is $398.9 million. That adjusted amount includes the original appropriation as approved by council, and then $18.7 million in carryover appropriations and $14.1 million that was advanced on behalf of the Huntington Park Garage project. We have revised the estimate for total expenses in the general fund, the operations side of the general fund, to $384.4 million. Although we still will underspend our annual, our adjusted budget of $398.9 million by approximately $14 million, we're projected to incur an operational deficit of approximately $7.9 million for 2016. The Office of Budget Management is working on a series of recommendations to be discussed with the executive relative to any remedial action they would suggest to offset the projected operational deficit by year end. For the general fund operational fund, our balance of reserves to expenditures is projected to be 28.2% for 2016, 28.2% for 2017. I'm sorry, 25.9. That is based on a denominator of operating expenditures, which does not include other financing uses or any uses of reserves. And I'll discuss that a little further later in the presentation. And that's related to a discussion about the interpretation of Ordinance 2011-56. One of the concerns we have from the revenue side for the general fund is sales tax collections. Sales tax collections support approximately 60% of the total general fund revenue. Currently, we're projecting total collections of $224.9 million, which is $9 million less than the original revenue estimate for the year. Total revenue in the general fund includes a one-time transfer of $16.5 million from the 0.25% sales tax fund in 2016. Through the first quarter, sales tax revenue was up less than 1% from our actual 2015 collections. April collections, however, mitigated some of the shortfall we experienced in the first quarter. April collections were up 8.6% as compared to 2015. We had hoped that trend would perhaps continue. However, the results that we received in May were not as optimistic as we thought. Those collections were 2% less than what we had collected during the same time period in 2015. The sales tax growth in 2017 is
Mr.
projected.
Kennedy,
Yes.
just to put it in perspective, so can you just, when you say in May, that's when the cash was reported, but it was for what period?
That would have been for February.
February, okay, thank you.
And we'll have a graphic about that in a minute. So this slide provides a little more detail about the sales tax. The estimate for the general fund share of the sales tax totals $224.9 million, which is $9 million or 3.8% less than what was originally budgeted. And again, that includes the $16.5 million cash transfer that's coming from the 0.25% fund. As I said, we have a 2% growth rate assumed in 2017. The transfer next year from the 0.25% fund goes down to $5.5 million. So that total estimate for next year is $217.9 million. Again, as you can see from the graphic representation, through the first quarter, sales tax collections were only up 0.07% from the comparable time period in 2015. Again, April was up 8.6%, but May results were down 2%. So we should find out in the next few weeks what June collections are. But based on what's been happening, we can't presume that things are going to turn around on a fairly significant basis.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Miller?
may I ask a question on the sales tax?
Yes, sir.
Could you put that back up on the screen? Good. Okay. My question is, if you look at the bar chart on the bottom with the green bars for the different years, my question is whether the totals for 2016 and for 2017 include the amounts that were transferred from the 0.25% sales tax.
That's combined.
Yeah, those are combined amounts.
So since the amount being transferred is going down considerably in 2017, that would seem to mean you would need to get an increase in actual collections of more than 2% in order to bring the total up to a 2% increase. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I think so. Any other questions about
Any questions?
sales tax?
No, thank you.
This slide will give you a brief overview of major funds, major categories for 2016. I'd like to just run through a couple of highlights there. As you can see, in terms of total expenditures at the bottom, the percentage variance from the budget is 3.6%, and it's a 0.2% change from prior year. As we stated earlier, the total expenditures are expected to approximate $384.4 million by year end. That's compared to the original and adjusted budget amount of $398.9. In terms of general government, there's approximately a $2 million surplus in terms of actual expenses versus budgeted. That reflects surpluses in personnel, primarily vacancies, and contract spending in the fiscal office, treasury, IT, and the Board of Elections. Payroll projections for fiscal do not include the impact of the recently approved bargaining agreement. That includes a retro for 2015. That union agreement was not approved until after the projections were finalized, so those will be adjusted in our next update. But that is expected to increase costs by approximately $300,000. In terms of justice and public safety, there's a $3.5 million surplus there, again, comparing original budget to projected spending by year end. Almost $2 million of that is due to the vacancies and assigned counsel costs in common police court. Those are all under budget and projected to remain so during the course of the year. Another $770,000 is in domestic relations. 60% of that number is associated with salaries. Domestic relations was exempt from the 10% reductions that were part of the original budget process and was given an additional $700,000 in 2016. The court's new administrative judge has been analyzing the court staffing levels and needs and has not yet, as of this time, used that additional funding. In terms of social services, there's a $400,000 surplus there in salaries and contractual spending associated with the Veterans Services Commission. Miscellaneous includes a $7.2 million surplus. $6 million of that is associated with the contingency and vacancy allocations that are not expected to be fully utilized by year end. And in the final category, subsidies to other funds, that surplus is approximately $1.4 million. Those subsidies are not fixed, so if there's budget surplus and revenue estimates aren't significantly different, the projected subsidies for this year will be less than what was originally budgeted. There's a couple of major subsidy variances: the Regional Crime Lab, the County Planning Commission, and Emergency Management. They're all down because they were subsidized in excess in 2015, so we're drawing down that carry-in beginning cash balance that occurred at the start of 2016. Those subsidies will go back up then in 2017 once that catch-up is exhausted. We only have a couple of deficits right now that we're projecting for the general fund. One is the Public Defender's Office, but OBM is working on a plan currently to address that.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Miller?
Can you explain why the number for the subsidies to other funds is so much higher in 2016, both on the budget and the estimate, as opposed to both the 2015 actual and the 2017 current estimate?
Do you have the detail on that?
Yeah. 16 million of that is the demolition.
Aha,
Which was one
okay,
time in 2016.
okay, thank you.
As I said earlier, we wanted to touch on the measurement of the ordinance requirement that the general fund maintain a reserve balance of 25%. As I stated earlier, if the comparison to the denominator is just on operating expenditures, as the current ordinance is worded, our balances are 28% in 2016, 26% in 2017, and then 22% in 2018. If we adjust those amounts to include other financing uses, those amounts then do drop down to lower levels. If we include the 0.25% allocation of the general fund, those numbers in 17 for the balance to expenditures before adjustments are 27 and 21%. And they would drop then based on that adjustment again to 23 and 20% in 2017. The adjusted balance backs out the $13 million in economic development reserves and 2 bond guarantees that total $3.4 million. That's out of our reserves. It does not include the projected carryover encumbrance balance that we started the year with, and does not include a reserve for capital improvements of $4.7 million. We'd like to recommend that maybe I think there was some talk of doing this late last year, that we revisit the requirements of that ordinance and more specifically lay out really what the metric is. If, as I said, if we take it just on the balance to actual operating expenditures, not including other financing uses, we're above the 25% threshold. But I know there's some concern that those other items could be considered as part of our annual expenditures or commitments. So we may want to have a discussion about clearing up that language.
Well, and that's something that Mr. Miller and I discussed with the executive and with Director Keenan and Mr. McAleer. So we're going to work on that.
Okay. Like to just summarize some of the things with the Health and Human Services Levy Fund. Our revenue is nearly $10 million under budget. That's a combination of what we now feel was an overstatement of the original revenue projections for 16 and a decrease in the first half property tax collections as compared to 2015. In terms of property tax collections, the biggest, we did an analysis between current year and 2015. The biggest variance is related to the lack of a tax lien sale this year. There's one that's projected to occur sometime in September. The last sale was in the fall, late fall of 2014. The monies that were received for that, since it came in past the final settlement, were then distributed in 2015, and that amounted to about $1.5 million. So we're down about $1 million total in property taxes, but $1.5 million of that was for the tax lien sale that occurred in 14 that was distributed in 15. So that should catch up. I don't believe the tax lien sales for this year are included in our projections yet. So the last number that I saw about that was roughly 980,000. If it goes in September. It just to give you some other kind of context of property values, there was a major court case that occurred at the end of 2015 in the Ohio Supreme Court, which exempted a number of major properties associated with the Cleveland Clinic and also one for University Hospital. For their main campus, $420 million that was originally taxable is now classified as exempt. Another building on their main campus was $111 million that was moved from taxable to exempt.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kennedy, there was a question regarding the Cleveland Clinic facility. Do you have any details as to the change in classification?
I don't have them with me, but I could provide you whatever you need in terms of the court case.
Okay, thank you.
So it's three properties for the Cleveland Clinic, one for $420 million, one for $111 million, another one for $48 million. University Hospital had an exemption granted on some new construction, so $27 million of their former taxable property value was moved to exempt. So the change, the net change with those items decreased since our rates are fixed, those lower those collection amounts. Just another point of information, the Global Center got moved from taxable to exempt. That was $427 million. And then there was 2 appeals through the state Board of Tax Appeals resulting from actions in our Board of Revision. ISG Steel was awarded a $28 million reduction in property value, and the Horseshoe Casino was awarded $42 million in a reduced property value. So the combination of the valuation changes and the lack of a tax lien sale has impacted our collections on a year-to-year comparison right now. And I'd be happy to get you any kind of more details that you would like associated with those, but I just thought I'd bring those up as a point of reference. As I said, we do not include any additional funding that we're going to get from a tax lien sale should it occur this year. Again, that estimated sale date is somewhere in the vicinity of September. Right now, we do not have any HHS agencies that are over budget. Most subsidies are projected to be less than what we originally anticipated. Therefore, will reflect budget surpluses in most of the agencies and departments supported by the Health and Human Services levies. Subsidies to juvenile court and the sheriff both projected to be over budget. Juvenile court by $525,000 and the sheriff by $200,000. That's in 2016. And then from an all funds basis, there's only a handful of agencies that we currently project deficits for this year. We have some significant surpluses. DCFS is projected to be $23 million. One of the changes that we've recently made to the procurement process is that we're only certifying balances that we need for the current year, as opposed to prior to this change, if someone had a contract in the middle of the year that was good for 2 years, we would certify the total appropriation against their budget for this year. We've changed that to now only certify the amount that's necessary between the time the contract is signed and the end of the fiscal year, and that's to comply with requirements of the revised code. So it's a kind of a one-time reduction this year because those amounts in that budget included those monies for subsequent years. So we will probably be coming back with some appropriation changes related to that to get the budget back in line. Employee health and wellness will have projected to be a $12 million surplus. We need some more time to work with the new consultant, Oswald, to kind of fine tune what is going on with the medical plan between now and the end of the year. But we'll get back to you with some updated numbers once we complete that coordinated project through Oswald and Human Resources. Development has a $9 million surplus, mostly in the demolition budget because we have not made those awards yet. Workforce is approximately $7 million. That's, again, associated with a partial certification of contracts. And early childhood has a $6 million surplus related to the contracts and an additional $10 million allocation in 2016 that will be spent prior to the end of the year.
So if I may, when you say that these agencies all have surpluses, that's as of today, but you're anticipating that those funds will be spent by the end of the year, is that correct?
Or we will have an adjustment to their budget to accommodate the change in how we're certifying the contracts.
So the demolition, you said, had 9 million, correct?
9, yes.
So that may be a bad example. So under development, there was what, 7 million in development?
9
Was it
total?
9? Okay. Workforce.
7 was workforce.
Okay, so workforce. So are we saying that we're not anticipating between now and the end of the year spending 100% of its budget, what was budgeted?
We don't think they probably will. So, but for DCFS, to get back to that, the projection is what we think they're actually gonna spend. The 23 million is just an appropriation balance that will have to be reduced. I don't think that's gonna change. Our projection is good. For demolition, the problem is the awards are not coming systematically. So at this point, we just don't have enough information.
And those savings, or those surpluses, I should say, are reflected in these numbers that we're seeing here. So if some of those awards or some of those issues were to be paid this year, it would further add to the deficit we're looking at?
No, because
Okay.
demolition, the 16 million for the general fund, we're showing the full 16 million being transferred this year.
Okay,
So if they award the full 9 million, it won't change the general fund.
okay, all right, thank you. Okay, yep, continue, please.
Here, you might as well stay here. We're done. This, again, is related to the all funds picture. There's a projected operating deficit of $94 million, but we do not consider that to be a major concern at this point because of the number of funds that accumulate reserves over the period of time. Maggie can give a little more detail on that. And our operating deficit also reflects the drawdown of PA cash reserves that was included in the original budget, and that was $23.8 million. So we'd be happy to
Yeah,
take any questions.
I think just because the number appears to be alarming, a $94 million deficit, could you provide a little more explanation as to the rationale behind that and why the belief is that we won't realize that deficit?
We might realize that deficit, but it's not alarming because there's cash to support it. So some of the, like the 25 million in the PA fund, that's 25 of that 94 million. The economic development funds in the Department of Development have been building up cash for the last couple of years. They're gonna spend them this year. We
And
have a
that-
huge spend in the 0.25% fund. It's the same thing.
So on a pro forma basis, then, what do we think that the number might be or could be?
I think those numbers are good. That's what we think they're gonna be based on what we know at the time.
Mr. Glassburn?
Yes, let's take the job creation fund, for example. There was funds that were not spent last year. Those funds have accumulated. The way that this reporting demonstrates it, though, is it doesn't add the money unspent from last year as revenue. But if we, let's say that, I'm just throwing a number out there. There was $10 million left over last year. If we spend it this year, then it would show as a $10 million deficit because we are spending $10 million more in the expenditures than we have revenue incoming this year. But the report doesn't demonstrate that there was 10 million left over in the first place. So that out of that 94 million, what the director is saying is that a number of items in that amount are for items where there's cash and we're spending down cash that was already in reserve.
And that's because we're a cash basis reporting entity, so we've got a timing difference between cash inflows and cash outflows,
We're
correct?
comparing current revenue to current expenses.
Okay,
And not including carry-in fund balances.
okay. So what is the carryover, what are the carryover encumbrances? Or, I'm sorry, the carryover cash to offset this 90? So what you're saying is we're gonna spend $94 million more in expenditures this year than revenue we took in.
But there's cash to support it, so like if you look in our schedules, toward the back are all the fund balances.
So that's what I'm asking. So in a true sense, we're gonna be writing checks this year for expenditures that took place last year. So that activity, because we're on a cash flow basis, shows up as a 16 expenditure, although the actual activity might have taken place in 15, correct?
In some cases, I think the activity is taking place in 16, but we're spending dollars that we earned over the past few years. Not just in 15, but in 14 and 13. The development funds have been building cash for several years.
Okay.
If I could suggest, maybe we can give you a subsequent schedule that breaks out that $94 million from a fund balance standpoint.
Great, thank you. Mr. Miller?
Mr. Chairman, Director, on the all fund schedule, the difference between the revenue and the expenditures is not exactly the same as the difference. The operating surplus deficit is not exactly the same as the difference between the revenue and the expenditures. Can you tell me what accounts for the rest of it?
No, it should be.
For example, if you take the 2016 current estimate, the revenue is 1,409,000,000 and the expenditures is 1,507,000,000. So that's a difference of 102. But the listed operating surplus deficit is 94.
Then that's an error.
And 2015 actual and the 2016 current and the 2017, none of them are exactly, they're all off by a little bit.
I'll revise it and get it to you.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Mr. Sharon?
Well, just kind of following up on Mr. Miller's, so the 94 is not correct?
No.
So,
Probably not.
okay, whatever that number should be, whether it's 102 or whatever, you're indicating that we have carryover from 13, 14, 15 that will more than cover the 102?
Yes.
Okay, can I get a breakdown of exactly what that is, and how much should it be covering the 102? By 10,000, 50,000, 5,000? What's it actually covering as far as the carryover that you're describing?
We have cash to support all of the expenses.
Okay, how much?
You mean how much cash is left over?
Of the 102 that you say that is carrying over from other activities, previous activities that were going into Department of Development and things of that nature, you say we have cash to cover that has not been spent from prior periods.
Right.
What is that amount?
I'll have to get back to you. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay,
But we aren't appropriating or projecting expenses if there isn't cash to support it.
okay,
I will give you a breakdown of the difference between revenue and expense.
What we're being asked here is to trust that you have the cash, and yet the number that you just presented across every one of these columns is incorrect. So, that you're presenting before this committee. So it's tough for us to just quote trust when you're just telling us right now that every number on this piece of paper is incorrect.
Okay. I
So-
can get you the detail on that, but we also have financial policies in place that prevent us from appropriating if there isn't cash to support.
Okay, well, it becomes difficult for me to trust when I'm looking at a sheet of paper that was, I assume you prepared it, and with some expectation that you reviewed it, and it's all incorrect. So I guess it's a little tough for us to sit here and being the ones that have the ultimate responsibility for the money on the council side, to both trust and to verify, as the old phrase used to go. So how fast can we get that? It should be just a matter of finding this information and getting it back to us, probably before the end of the day, then I would assume. That
Should not be a
Yeah.
problem. yes.
Thank you.
Any questions? So just so I'm setting aside the operating surplus deficit number, even just assume that the math, it's 102. I'm just trying to better understand. The revenue coming in is 2016 cash in the door, correct?
Correct.
From multiple sources. The expenditure number, the 1,000,000,005, is cash going out the door during the year, whether the activity was incurred in the current year or not.
Correct.
Cash leaving. And what you're saying is the reason that there's little concern about the $94 million or $102 million deficit is because there were revenues earned in previous years that is now sitting in cash to offset expenses where the checks are actually written in subsequent years.
Right.
Is that correct? Okay, and that's where we had asked, and you're going to get it to us, for a list to understand exactly the revenue. The cash reporting, as we know, is a little different than accrual-based reporting, and the matching concept doesn't apply. And so that's what we're trying to understand
Right.
is what the matching concept of reporting revenues against expenses would look like. And that's just a challenge in understanding the difference between a cash basis versus accrual basis reporting. To Mr. Schron's point, Mr. Miller's point is we want to make sure we're not spending more, that we're not eating into our reserves and spending more than we have coming in.
Right.
Because the budgets we support don't show that. The budgets that we supported showed expenses covering revenue. I'm sorry, revenue covering the expenses. But the appearance of this is not that.
From this by
From this
itself, yes.
by itself. So that's where we're seeing the challenge.
So we will get you that updated
Okay. All right, thank you.
amount.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Did you? Okay. Was there anything else that you wish to present?
We'll get back to you with that information as soon as we can today.
Okay, all right. Is there anything else from the committee? No. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to take care?
Is there any miscellaneous business before the committee? Any public comment unrelated to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
Then we will stand adjourned. Thank you.